Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Ground Up Show. I'm your host, Matt Diavella, and today I'm sitting down to speak with the very funny comedian and writer, Blake Wexler. His last album went to #1 on iTunes. It's called 12 Years of Voicemails from Todd Glass to Blake Wexler. And I'll let you do the math there to figure out what the album's about. It's incredibly funny, very creative. I recommend everybody check it out. On this episode of the podcast, we talk about self-distribution versus working with production companies. He's had experience taking both routes and was very informative on that. We discuss how he got started as a comedian, how he improved his craft, and one of the earliest experiences he can remember is bombing. It's pretty bad. It's pretty brutal. But it taught him a lot about how to take things to the next level and how to deal with doubt and rejection. It's a very, very good podcast. I think you guys are going to like it. Let's waste no more time. This is Blake Wexler. For a lot of comedians specifically, you kind of have to be in either New York or LA, right? I think there's certainly exceptions, and there's certainly ways to kind of break through apart from that. But
Right.
it's such a part of being a comedian is the community, right? And connecting with people in person.
Yeah, I think I know 3 comedians who have made it work without being here, but they did spend extended series of time in New York or LA. I mean, it depends on what you want to do, too. Like, you could live anywhere and make a living off stand-up, you know, but if you want to write or if you want to act, God forbid, you have to live like in New York or LA.
Yeah, I actually had a similar trajectory where I was doing freelance work and all the gigs I was getting were weddings, like local TV commercials.
Right.
And all that stuff you have to be local to be able to do it. Like I'm traveling between New Jersey, Philly, and New York filming weddings. And I was pretty much, I was locked on the East Coast. But then
Right.
as I grew my business and started to do more tech clients, if a tech client couldn't pay to send me to California or Atlanta or wherever I was shooting, then they probably couldn't afford me, period.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Like, so I think that's the thing is like when you're starting out, I think it's certainly helpful to be around an area where, you know, you almost are kind of locked in place because who's flying you around or, you know, you can't really make it as a traveling comic before you actually build up your experience first in a city.
Yeah, I mean, you really just can't make it as a traveling comic, period.
Yeah. Not an ideal situation.
No, I think you're right. Like, you're totally right where there is so much to be said. And I started so young and I have always been very ambitious. So I hated when people would tell me like, yeah, like you're not ready for something. And they'd be 100% unequivocally correct. And they would be correct 4 years after that, you know, like, but I was always like, oh, I want to like do this. I want to go feature. I want to like headline or whatever, you know, like, but it's like, dude, you have barely 5 minutes and it's not that great, you know, and you're also 17 years old. So why don't you like pump the brakes and just put the time in and get better and not being discovered in even like a market like Philly, which is so big. Like Philadelphia is enormous, but it's so good where you can work and get better in a city like that. And there's no agents coming to Philly. Like there's no TV people coming to Philly. Now that's kind of changing a little bit, which is great. But and I'm using Philly like like Chicago or Austin or Boston or anything else that rhymes with those cities. But yeah, I think it's a great, you know, training ground.
Yeah,
I guess.
Dude, I had you reminded me because you said like no agents come out to shows in Philly. I remember doing the Raven Lounge, like that. The Raven Lounge is still going, right?
In some sort
In some
of iteration.
form, yeah. It's so weird just because what was it like 10 years ago,
Right.
or so? Like I was doing the Raven Lounge. You know, I'd only done stand up for maybe like 8 months or so. It wasn't a very long time, but I remember doing a set there. It did pretty well. And then afterwards, this woman comes up to me and she's like, hey, I book shows and this and that. And I'm like, holy shit, this is it. This is my
the
big break. This is it. I'm going to be on Comedy Central tomorrow. It's going to be huge. And I don't know if you ever did this show, but she like ran a show out of Manayunk at some like restaurant or something.
Probably.
Yeah, it was really bad. It was just like a a dining restaurant that wasn't supposed to have comedy.
No.
And I got there and I was like, oh, this is really, really uncomfortable. And like I did 2 minutes and then got off.
And you get off stage.
There was no stage.
Oh, you got off the carpeted area.
Yeah. I left the kitchen.
You stepped around the crumbs, the kitchen. I don't know when you stopped doing those shows. Like, because I know, so I've probably been doing I first did stand up maybe 13 years ago for the first time. And I still, every once in a while I'll do a show like that still. And it's just like, how much time do you have to put in? And we were kind of talking about this earlier where it's like, well, you gotta say no after a certain point. Don't be like a no person. Like, it's just I try to say yes to almost everything, but it just started occurring where they're like, hey, this is where my show is, and I'll look it up and it's, you know, like Buffalo Wild Wings or something, you know, and I'm just like, dude, you've worked too hard. You've worked too hard. I'm going to be in a bad mood driving there. It's not going to go well. I'm going to be in a terrible mood coming home. And I'm going to like hate my act, you know, for the night. And it's just like, I've worked too hard to do that anymore.
Right. Well,
but I still do it. I will still do it. Yeah, 100%.
Because like, I mean, the thing though is you're right on all those counts, but also like, what are you getting out of it? Like, does it actually help your material? Just the fact that you're getting on stage and like, you know, you're able to kind of work with things and maybe adapt to a situation that's more challenging. Is that helpful?
So it can be. So there's a different range of not ideal stand-up gigs where there are some where you could have like enough tricks by now or like experience where you could work, like turning a hostile crowd or an indifferent crowd like back to you is a really great thing because it gives you confidence. It gives you like you'll also pick up tricks where even a thing where if there's like you hear chatter in the crowd, I learned this from Todd Glass, where I'll drop the mic away from my mouth so it doesn't just sound like ambient noise anymore. You actually hear someone speaking, and people will lower their voices because they'll be like, oh, someone's talking, you know, which sounds weird because of course you're talking, you have a microphone, but people, if it gets lower, they'll be like, oh, we don't realize how loud we're being. And then they'll hear you say something funny and their attention like goes to you. So working on those skills is helpful, but it's now, you know, like recently in my career, it's like, oh, I have those skills. Now it's just a waste of time. You know what I mean? But then, yeah, I mean, every once in a while you can be surprised. Like, oh, I met a friend, you know, like who was in the crowd or something. You know, like, I know that's an odd, like, I don't do stand up for friends, you know, like to get friends. Yeah, we're going to give you 3 friends tonight, you know, and a couple drinks. But yeah, that I think I would say 9 times out of 10, you don't get anything out of it.
Right. Which I think the tough thing though is you probably look at it like, well, I'm not going to do anything else tonight. Right.
Yeah.
You know, so I might as well do that over nothing. Mm-hmm. But I guess you could replace it with something else.
Yeah, you could I'll replace it. So that's the thing where I'm like, all right, if I say no to this, I have to write tonight, you know? Or if I've been doing a lot lately, you're going to go to bed and like recharge, you know? Like, because that's the thing, I won't take care of myself often where you just want to do more and do more and do more. And I'll realize that, oh, I have bronchitis now because I didn't sleep for 3 weeks, you know, because I've just been working so hard. So I think that's a thing too of just self-care. Like I just found out about self-care and it's
super important,
intriguing. I'm trying to figure out where I stand on it.
Right. Yeah. No, dude, I feel the same exact way, especially when you're like in the middle of a really big project and you have to grind it out sometimes, and you'll work late nights, early mornings, and you when you come through the other side, once you're done with, you know, say that big project, then you can start to sit back and be like, hey, is there a way to do that where I don't feel like complete shit during the whole process?
Yeah, and also, like, are you a fucking psycho? What did you do the past month? It's insane. Because I had a crazy April, and then I looked back on it, and in my mind going into the April, I'm just like, April is going to suck. You won't sleep. And afterwards, I look back on it, and I'm shocked that there wasn't some sort of permanent physical ailment that occurred from it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a very strange. But yeah, I don't know if that goes away or once you reach a certain level of success or ambition, but I would imagine it doesn't.
I think that the ambition is the key word. Is like, if you're ambitious, if you have an extra few minutes to prepare for a show or to prepare for something, you're going to use all that time that's available.
Right.
And so that's the hardest thing to do, is just be like, all right, I need to turn off. Like, I'm not going to work this day, over the weekend, whatever it is. I think you have to be very intentional about. I think sometimes being in a relationship definitely helps with that, because they're kind of like yanking you like, hey, take some time off. We got to, go to Malibu for the weekend or something.
Yeah, be a human being for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Is it weird that we just like started the show without an intro or anything?
No,
just
it's perfect.
Got running into it.
I love it.
Is that what you've done? A lot of podcasts?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I gotta let these people know what you've done.
I sent you my reel, my podcast reel.
He's done a bunch of podcasts, guys. I'm gonna give you like an actual intro before the show.
Cool.
We're gonna make you sound like really, really good. It's gonna be like extra stuff besides the 12 podcasts that
Huge.
you recorded.
I love it. Thank you.
Like, what do your days look like now? Because I know you've recorded a couple specials and you've put out a couple albums. But what's like the day to day over, say, like the past month?
I think I've focused so much on stand-up throughout my life, where it's taken me so long to get where I am with that, where I think I've made like a lot of great strides in the past 2 years with it. But I mean, hopefully I won't be where I'm going to be at, for a very long time. But I think I'm finally getting in a groove with it, and that took like 13 years, so
oh my god, that's a intimidatingly large number for a lot of people who are like just getting into it.
Yeah, but I think it's also cool, like hopefully cool, where stand-up comedian Bill Burr, for instance, like he didn't get anything for 10 years in, and then Lewis Black, weird reference, but like I loved Lewis Black growing up, still like him, and he was in his 50s, like Mark Maron was in his 40s before he got. So I always think it's cool when people who are like older, like get the thing. So yeah, I also was so young when I started when I was like 15. So I can only be so good at something, I feel like, at 15. So those were years where none of the material was going to stay. I wasn't mature enough to have a point of view really worth speaking about yet, but that was time learning about the business and how, like, what not to do. Like, I learned when I was 15 not to run the light, where when people who start later, it's like, I ran the light at like, in my 30s, and then that's just a bad look. So
right, so that's the red light that they flash when your time's up.
Yeah, so when you're like, usually if you have a minute left in your stand-up set, they'll like show you a little light in the back, and then you're supposed to like get off stage, and it's not a rude thing. It's your allotted amount of time on stage. So say you're doing 10 minutes, they'll give you the light at 9 and you start wrapping up. But when you don't start wrapping up, it's fucking rude and it affects everybody else, because people who go on later, the audience will be more tired, or their time will have to be cut, so it's just out of respect you wrap up. And I learned early on, seeing how people would react to people who didn't respect that light. I'd be like, even as a kid, I know that that's gospel. You can't do that, have I done it since then? Of course. But I had really funny things to say. But yeah, it's just stuff you learn about the business, and like, if I hang out here, then I have a better chance of getting a spot, or, that sort of thing.
Right. Like, it doesn't matter how good you are. Like, maybe it matters if you're Dave Chappelle. Like, let Chappelle go. Or, well, not that he's coming to open mic nights, but like he will randomly come in on a show where they usually have, even like a show, you have certain time limits, right? Whether it's 15 minutes, half hour. Yeah,
even with him, like, I've seen, my favorite thing in the world is when a very famous, successful comic drops in on a show and only does 10 to 15 minutes. Because they could do 45, they could do an hour, but it fucks with everybody else on the show. Where I heard about a show, it was like this showcase for Montreal, which is this enormous, like the biggest comedy festival, and for newer up and coming comedians, it's one of the biggest things that you can get early in your career. And comedians like Moshe Kasher, who's incredibly funny and like successful, and then I think Kumail Nanjiani was on the showcase as well, who just hosted SNL, is incredibly funny and successful. They were showcasing for that, and they remembered, I legitimately do not remember what the comic's name was, who's way less successful than they are now, dropped in and bumped all of them back on like one of the biggest nights showcasing for this of their lives. and they don't forget it. Like, you never forget that. So if not to be respectful towards others, to be, just because that's the right thing to do, don't be an asshole, because it'll fuck your career up, because years later these people are going to be making Oscar award nominated films and you won't get an audition for it because you're a prick. You know what I mean?
It's very easy to screw up your reputation. All it takes is one thing.
It's true.
And then people, even if that was like I think you'll get by with an honest mistake, but if people peg you as, oh, that guy's an asshole, oh, that guy doesn't like respect other people's time, then it's very hard you have to work extra hard to get rid of that reputation.
For sure. And I sometimes cheer for people who actually do turn that around and put the work in, but it's rare. Like, if you're an asshole, generally, you don't grow and become not an asshole.
Right. You got a little eyelash right there.
Oh, do I? Thank you.
I'm a sucker for the details.
I love it. Is it gone? Did I get it?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, cool.
I did a interview with Dan Harris for Minimalism, and he had a piece of hair on his shoulder for the whole interview. It was horrible.
It would drive me insane.
When I was looking, I didn't see it in the moment, and then later when I'm editing, because I was interviewing Dan Harris, I was like nervous.
Right, of course.
And I'm like just thinking, I'm in my head my whole time, and I'm like, oh shit, like
the hair.
There was a hair there.
Yeah, no, always. Whatever else occurs with my body throughout this, please feel free to point it out.
Yeah, your eyes leaking.
Oh yeah, no, that's. I'm just crying. Yeah, don't worry, I'm crying. It's totally normal.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Why? Like, what got you into stand up at 15? Like, why'd you decide to pursue it?
I loved it, and I had incredibly supportive parents, and still do. They really did a 180 after my first album. They stopped supporting. No, I'm kidding. I lived. It's funny. A lot of comics, they say, "Oh, my parents, they were fucked up, and that's why I'm this comic or whatever." Not necessarily in that voice, but I had incredibly supportive parents, and my mom was trying to give me a life skill, I guess, or a thing to do. And my options were, there was this thing called Mainline School Night outside of Philly, where it's for adults really at night to take night classes at like a local high school or whatever. They bring in some sort of teacher. And for me, my options were I could learn how to play golf, like to make business deals. Like when I got older, I could learn.
Smart.
Thank you. Yeah, they wanted to give me something, and they were like, "All right, you can learn to play golf, or you can take like a dance class or something, like get into dance." It's funny. These are my like. We can't get them involved in football. Or
let's be honest,
right? Yeah, we're very limited. We're working within a framework here. And then the other option was they offered a stand-up comedy class, and I always watched. Like Premium Blend, was the Comedy Central show for up and coming comics at the time. And I love stand up. So I'm like, oh, I want to take this class, which was really, now thinking back on it, shocking that I thought I could just do it, I guess. But that would be my advice, is if you want to do stand up, just do it. So I took this class, and it was taught by like a local, comedian. And at the end, you don't really learn much. They make you like write jokes and come to class and perform them. And then they also teach you like, on a 3-person show, the first person is the host, and they do 10 minutes and they warm up the crowd. The next person's the middle, and they do 20 to 25. Like, it was just very logistical stuff, which was a good lesson. And then, but the most important thing is they made you do a graduation show, and that's when at the end of it you perform 5 minutes. That like they produce a comedy show at like the attic of a local bar, and then you and all the new people perform, and then they have like an experienced headliner, like a local comic and stuff. So it was a really good thing, because once I did it, I was like, I ate shit. I bombed like a maniac, but I was so into it. Like, I didn't even know or care that I bombed. I'm like, I am a stand-up comedian now. And I would do an open mic once a month, because I was still in high school. So I couldn't drive. So my mom would take me to, and this, when you first start out doing stand-up, you were talking about that like weird Manny Young thing. You don't get to do the best shows. Like, you'll perform anywhere. So I did a show when I was a sophomore in high school at, what was it? In a basement. The show started at 10:30 at night on like a Tuesday. Oh my God. It was in the basement of a bar in Philly. My mom took me there, and it was called Bar Noir. Do you remember that place?
I don't think so, no.
It was strange. It was so strange. It was this weird variety show. It was an open mic also, and it was hosted by a trans person named Needles Jones. And it was like just a culture shock. But my mom just took me, and she was like hit on by some fucking drunk at the bar. Because who else would be out at that time
Right.
of night?
Like, oh, wow, there's a woman here.
Right. Oh, what the fuck is that? The hell? A mom.
Yeah. She's like dressed properly.
Right. Yeah. She's not wearing a fucking shredded band t-shirt. So, and yeah, I started doing that. And then I did a thing called a bringer show, which is when you first start out. It's a very predatory fucking thing comedy clubs do, where they'll have new comics. You have to bring at least 4 or 5 paid audience members. There's some where you have to bring up to 20 in like New York, and they pay $20 a ticket to watch terrible stand-up comedians for like, you know, and obviously so many people have become successful from that, but it is totally predatory on younger comics, but you need stage time. So I brought 4 of my friends and like their parents, because they couldn't get into the comedy club without their, because they were also like 18 or 9 or what, 17, I guess at the time. And I did like new talent night at Rascals in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I don't know if that was there when you were there, but excuse me. I did it with now one of my best friends, Pat Barker, who was his first show, you know, like comedy club show too. So I just kept doing it, and then eventually I was able to drive myself to shows, and I would do it like a few times a week, I guess, like after school, and then I just couldn't stop doing it.
Were there any early bombing experiences that stick with you that were particularly memorable?
Of course. Yeah. There was one, I think I may have emailed you about this, but like there was a show that I did where you just, again, like this is the ambition, like where my skill was not caught up to my ambition, where I saw like a post in this Philly comedy group or whatever about a show in the Poconos. And they were looking for a feature act, which is someone who does 25 minutes to a half an hour usually before the headliner. And I said I can do that. And they were like, "Can you work clean?" And I didn't like have any dirty jokes really. I'm like, "Yeah, of course." I may have had 5 minutes at most. So I had to do 5 times that. But in my head, I'm like, "Oh, I can do crowd work, you know, whatever."
That's insane, dude.
I know, but never in my mind was this a bad idea.
Right.
You know, I'm like, "Yeah, I could do crowd work for 25 minutes. I can't do that. I can maybe do that now, and it won't go well, you know? And that's like an additional 8 years of skills being built up. So, and also the Poconos, they're not going to fucking like me, you know? So it was like some like just condescending 19-year-old, you know, from the suburbs. So I go up there, and the headliner was a ventriloquist. Why wouldn't it be?
Sure.
And the host crushed with just like homophobic, racist, awful material. And I'm like, and that's when I'm like, oh, I'm in trouble. And I went up and I did my 5 minutes of material, and I was really trying to stretch it. And it was over. My 5 minutes were over in 3 because that 5 minutes was factored in laughter, of which there wasn't any. So, and it was in a ski lodge in the fucking Poconos. Poconos is just a horseshit area.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, it's really bad.
Don't go to Poconos.
Do not go there. And I just ate shit, and I did another I just did really bad crowd work. No one was listening. I was being heckled, and it was so bad. And I was being paid in cash like that night to do that material. And I did maybe 11 minutes at most, and I just got off the stage. And afterwards, first of all, the man who booked me, he goes like, "You told me you had 25 to a half an hour. You did it you barely did 10." And I'm like, "I'm really sorry." And he paid me anyway, which was like the most devastating, I think. But I'm like, "Oh, you won't have to pay me." It was, and I've been not paid for gigs that I murdered at, you know, it's later in my career, but it was just so devastating. And then the ventriloquist, started giving me shit backstage through one of his puppets. So he was being mean to me. He goes, "Oh, Jimmy, Jimmy, what did you think of that set?" And he'd be like, "Oh, that guy fucking sucks." And I'm like, "You're making fun." Like, I understand the puppet isn't making fun of me. You're making fun of, you know, it was just like such a
that's just the icing on the cake.
Yeah. I think that guy died 3 years ago. But it was just such an experience where I did I think that was the worst part, where I've bombed so many times, but that was 100% my fault, you know? And I think that's where I was like reckless and irresponsible with that shit.
Right. There are going to be times there are always going to be times where you have to push yourself. I remember Bill Burr talking about this, where he's like, you're always going to be doing shows where you feel like you're not prepared or you're not ready for it.
Yeah.
But you always have to push yourself to do it. Maybe that's one of the cases where you... It's like the exception to the rule.
Like maybe push yourself the extra mile, but not like, across the country.
Yeah. Like maybe an extra, 5 minutes on top of a 20-minute set that you're like, all right, maybe I can like
not
improv
5
this a bit.
times longer.
5 times longer.
Right.
That's tough, man.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad. But
that's really...
Whatever.
It
put me through college.
Right. How long did that like sting for? Did that have any effect on you as a comedian, or were you like, keep going, put your head down, get to work?
It did, in that I like you just said, put a ceiling on gigs that I would claim that I was able to do. So before that, I mean, obviously I said I could do 30. I had 5. Where now I'm like, like if they say 10, I could do 8. You know what I mean? So that made me never do that again. I think. And yeah, even when I like started doing colleges and shit, I didn't know if I had a clean hour, and that was the thing where I could stretch. Like at that point, I had the skills to stretch, but I was like nervous for my first show, where I was like, "Oh shit, is this going to be a Pocono situation?" And that was like 8 years later, So yeah, it was. It definitely had a lasting effect, where it was a huge lesson.
1 hour must have been a huge milestone to be able to get that much material. Although I guess at that point, does it just creep up on you where you're not really as impressed with yourself? I feel like probably the first 5 minutes you ever create that work are probably way more challenging to do than once you kind of push it to an hour.
I think what it is that when you have an allotted amount of time, you get the light earlier than you think, which is really good. So if you lose track, if you still have material left over and you see like, oh, I have 2 minutes left, and you think to yourself, oh shit, that went by so quick, then that's when it starts getting pretty cool. So for instance, when you first start out, you have shorter sets. So you usually do like 5 to 7 minutes when you first start. And I remember, Jesus Christ, what accent is that? I did not know what in my family is from wherever people speak like
remember.
that.
All the rest of my words are normal, but we just say remember.
Yeah, I'm going to have to use the word recall instead, just to simplify it.
Yeah.
But when I first had that 5-minute set and I still had material that I planned to do left over where I couldn't do it, I was like, oh, cool. I don't have to be nervous about hitting my 5-minute mark anymore. And then that happened with an hour. And now like maybe in the past year and a half, I have 2 hours recorded, like for purchase soon. So it's not only do I have, that hour, I can do like 40 minutes without, I'll sweat from like being out of shape, but like I will, like, that's a thing that actually, I have issues accepting or being in the moment and being like, oh, this is a cool milestone, I should appreciate this. But that I did appreciate, where I remember to the time when I would stress out about not being able to hit, the amount of time I was allotted to do. And now I can hit it without, even really thinking, because just from building up that material over the years, it just goes by quicker.
I want to talk about this album that you have called 12 Years of Voicemails from Todd Glass and Blake Wexler.
Yeah, what do you think it's about?
Oh my God. One of the most creative things I've ever seen.
Oh, cool.
I finished listening to it this morning. It's fucking hilarious. So funny.
Thank you.
How do you even describe, first of all, like, why you don't pick up your phone ever? Like, what's the percentage of
That's great.
the times that you picked up your phone when he called? You're like, oh shit, Todd's calling again. I better.
That's really fun. We're now like, I never want to pick up my phone no matter who's calling. I mean, Todd's an exception because he's one of my close friends. But then, because I started out saving them because I was 15 or 16, and I met Todd Glass after a show at Helium in Philadelphia, and I was a huge fan of his from Last Comic Standing, and he's always been very supportive of younger comics. So Chip Chantry introduced us. Chip was just hosting back then, and he was, oh, this is Blake. He's a young comic, just started doing comedy, and Todd was like, hey, here's my number. If you ever need advice, give me a call. Just so nice. So I started saving them because he was so famous to me that if I missed a call from him, I had a heart attack. Like I was just like, oh my God, I missed it. My career's over. You know, even at like I'm in my parents' house, you know, so I saved them initially because I was thinking, holy shit, this comedian that I love has left me these voicemails, and I just want to keep them and show them to my friends. Like I would like, you know, faux brag, like, hey, Todd Glass left me another voicemail, you know. So I saved them, and then I also just save voicemails in general. Like it's kind of morbid, but it's, oh, if this person dies, I want to have their voice, you know? So I save all my parents. I've saved sweet ones from like my best friends and stuff. So I do have a catalog, but Todd's were different in that they were also so funny that I started saving them as like, oh, how cool is this? Todd Glass is leaving me voicemails, to, oh, I'm going to listen to these later because they make me laugh, you know? And I kept saving those, and then I guess like it got to the point where, I mean, he would call me because there was a time difference. I was still living on the East Coast, so I guess he would call late at night, like he was high and bored, so he'd like call. He knew how much this like high school college kid would appreciate it, so he'd just leave a long voicemail and I'd wake up, you know, to it. So that's how it started, and then I just kept saving them, and I like put them on a hard drive, and after a certain period, Todd was actually riffed. I don't think we included this one, but he riffed on a voicemail and then like totally forgot about it. He goes like, I hope you're saving these. We can make millions. And then that became, I'm like, oh shit, like we're not going to make millions, but this could be a cool CD or an album at some point. And then I just kept saving them. And after a period of time, we talked about releasing the thing. And then that's actually when we stopped including them kind of in the album, because he became slightly self-aware enough where we didn't want it to like hurt the album. You know what I mean? Because the worst thing in the world would be is if I released an album where the person knew I was saving it, you know? So Todd obviously didn't know for our album, but even later he'd be like, he'd leave a voicemail totally naturally, and afterwards he'd be like, oh, you got to put this on the CD. But even though it was still natural, I didn't want that thought to creep into people's heads, so I just didn't even include those. So there were probably 20 or 30 that weren't included, either because there were a few for that reason, or we talk shit on a comedian.
Oh yeah, I was actually wondering if there were certain things where you're like, you ran it by, I mean, you guys all like listened to it and kind of put the structure together, but then realized like, I probably shouldn't put that in the album. Yeah,
there were a few where we made fun of like a comic, and a bad comic, and we obviously weren't going to include that. And then there were a few where there were some jokes that like would make sense between, like, you know, would be like an edgy joke between friends, you know, but for someone who didn't know like our politics or, you know, how progressive we are with certain things, if you heard it in a vacuum, it would be like, oh, are those guys making fun of the right thing, you know? So we're like, why even like include something like that? So so we would cut those. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we cut, but yeah, it was mostly like, oh, we don't want to like make fun of anyone, and we just, if it's out of context, we don't want people, because that was the thing too, where when you joke around with friends, you say things that you would not say in front of other people, and like not because you believe in it, but you'd be making fun of someone, you know, but people may not get that. So they were voicemails that were for one audience, and I think that's what made it kind of cool, where Todd would leave voicemail. This wasn't for the masses. He literally just did this for me, you know? So he could make references, like name like a best friend of mine, you know, that like isn't in the entertainment business. You know, he works an office job. Be like, yeah, you know, and then that guy comes in. I'm like, hey, how does he know that? Like, he's making fun of my friend. But if he did it on a special, he'd have to name a famous person, you know? But it was just totally specifically tailored to me. So yeah, but also I think people appreciate that. And then a bunch of other, like Rory Scovel, who's incredible, had texted me afterwards, and he goes, dude, I saved Todd's voicemails for 2 years and I lost it like on a phone. So I think he's done this with so many other people, but I'm the only one neurotic enough to have saved them.
Right. Well, all right. We have to, I think I want you to kind of describe how these voicemails are so funny, because I think it also probably helps to describe Todd Glass, his personality, his humor, just so insane and over the top, and just so good at like riffing, and there's almost like a dynamic to these as well, and like obviously as like the mentor mentee, like him giving you shit, like maybe describe Todd and as well as the relationship between you guys.
Very good hosting. I should do that. So Todd Todd is like one of the silliest people in the world, and he loves the best way I can put it is that he loves to play, and he can always like we've had incredibly like intelligent philosophical like conversations and serious conversations, but he loves to do bits and be silly all the time. So he'll call me and pretend to be like he's crying after an audition, and then he'd be like, "Hey Blake, I'm so sorry. I'm crying because I just went on an audition and they said I couldn't cry good." And it's like, oh, he just did that. Like he woke up and then had this bit, but there was no one around for him to be silly with, so he just calls someone and does the bit. It's not going in his act. Like he's not. Yeah. It's literally. I think he has all this pent-up silliness that he needs to get out, and he did it in the form of voicemails. So it would be ones like that where he would do a character, or he would act like pissed off at me, where early on I was going back to Philly maybe a year or two after I moved out here, and he was doing a podcast with this comic, I believe it was Julian, and then James Heskey, who's hysterical, and Todd was doing their podcast, and I couldn't do their podcast when I was in town, and Todd basically leaves me a voicemail. He goes, Blake, I have a bone to pick with you. You're canceling on people. You ain't shit. I could do this podcast, so you could. I'm Blake Wexler. I come back to Philly, and now I'm canceling on people. So it's a really funny thing where it's like, oh, this really successful comedian is just making fun of me. Like he would make fun of me for being in college, he would like bully me for not dropping out and just doing stand up, so yeah, I would say it's part crazy silliness, part him silly bullying me, and then also part just him getting really high and then just right. talking for 5 minutes.
Yeah. And then the album did really well. I mean, it went to #1 on iTunes. Mm-hmm. That's got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, it did. I think it charted on the Billboard charts, which is cool. Like, I don't know if it actually, I didn't follow up on that, but yeah, it did. It was just really cool. It's just a thing where that had more sentimental qualities to me, I guess, because it is a thing that two people, because it also shows the chronology of a friendship where, like you said, the beginning is like mentor, mentee, and then it ends where like Todd and I are like incredibly close now, and he even gives me, there's this voicemail where he gives me this amazing like breakup advice where I went through, like a brutal breakup like everyone does, but he just left this really, really sweet voicemail. And it's just a cool thing where it starts out where he's leaving tickets for my dad and I at Helium, and it kind of gets to the point where, oh, he's not just some mentor anymore. Like this guy's calling his friend to like help him through like a tough situation, and that's obviously intermixed with like just the silliest bullshit in the world, but there is like some sweetness to it too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's I think that's kind of I think that's like the nice thing, that's the balance, is like right. you could just be hilarious, and then at some point like you're like, oh shit, like this is real, like there's no advice in here. One of my favorite ones is the Mark Maron one after he did right. the Mark Maron podcast.
That was my favorite one too.
Yeah, because like pretty I didn't follow it when it happened, mm-hmm. but I guess, is that when he came out?
Yeah,
on Mark Maron's podcast.
Yeah, so Todd is like incredibly inspirational to a lot of people, where Todd came out later in life, and he did it on Mark Maron's podcast, because I think some of the reasons where Todd is such a funny like personal comedian on stage, but he would never talk about, like he would say, oh, like my girlfriend, my like whatever, and then he wanted to come out on this great forum, and he was so nervous about the drop of it, and we had never really discussed it before. Obviously, I'm just like, oh yeah, like, I mean, I have so many friends where I don't meet, their girlfriends or like their partners or whatever. So, and also I don't give a shit. So, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm at Todd's, and we're just hanging out, and I never, had any idea or cared, like which, about his sexuality or whatever. So, he calls me leading into the, like, after he had recorded Maron, like that podcast where he was going to come out, because he wanted to come out to me before it released. And he calls me, he goes, Blake, I have something, big to tell you. Like, why don't you come over tonight, and then we'll go hang out at the Improv. And in my selfish mind, I don't know if I've ever told this story before, I thought that he had gotten a TV show and I was going to write on it. So I'm like,
that's so good.
I'm like already like ready to buy sneakers and stuff. Like I'm like already have like my funds allocated to what I'm gonna spend it on. And I'm going over there. I'm like, I'm a fucking writer. This is the shit. And I go over, and then Todd, like, you know, he goes like, Blake, and then he like was nervous about even saying it, and I'm like, the proud new owner of a television show. Like, what are you? And then he said, and then I'm like, and then it hit me. I'm like, oh, and I just like went over and gave him a big hug, and he goes like, get the fuck away from me. So, but yeah, it was a really, really fun thing. And then he started doing this bit about when he came out on Maron's podcast that Maron had actually tricked him and that he wasn't actually out of the closet. So he, like, at the Improv that night, Mark Maron was actually there, and I was like eating dinner with Todd, and Mark came over, and he says to Todd, he goes, oh, Todd, is this like, boy, I mean, and then like just to give Todd shit, and then Todd, like, only a few people knew what Todd was talking about, but he was wandering around the Improv just going like, by the way, everyone, just so you know, Mark Maron lies. He lies. And the people who got it, like the four of us who understood what he was talking about, were crying laughing, because it's the most vulnerable, silly thing in the entire world. If you haven't listened to that episode when Todd did Mark Maron, you have to do it. It's like really, really vulnerable and personal and great. So yeah, but that's the Mark Maron voicemail that you were talking about, where he leaves me a voicemail just going, Blake, Mark Maron tricked me, and I went on there to talk about how much I love girls, and he edited it like to make it sound, you know how he works. Like, so Maron's obviously a guy that I'm a huge fan of and like had so much respect for. So that was a cool thing as a fan of comedy also, where you just kind of do you know, like a high shot like onto your life and just be like, oh shit, who would have thought when I took that class, you know, in Lower Marion, Pennsylvania, I'd be sitting at a table with these two like heroes of mine at some point. And then hopefully I have that thought over and over and over again as, like, you know, my career keeps going. But yeah, that was a moment that was really, really super cool, and also just incredibly, you know, kind and of Todd to involve me in. So yeah, it's a cool thing. I'm glad it did well.
So you released that album self-published, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then is that the same for the past two albums, the one that you just recorded and then the previous one?
The previous one I released myself as well. This next one I'm doing through a label.
So yeah, what's the decision making there? Why do a label versus creating it and putting it out yourself?
So the first so when I did it the first time myself, I don't think anyone wanted to release it, or I didn't ask anyone, I think too. I think for my first album, I asked Comedy Central if they'd do it, and they said no. So as they should have. And but the album's great, but like I had not been on their network yet, and just wouldn't have made sense. So I'm like, all right, well, if they're not going to do it, I should just do it myself, because are they going to add more than they're taking away, I think is the question that I asked myself. So I was ready to do it. I didn't really want to wait. I wanted to do it. I was just ready. So I worked with a guy named Alex Dingley in Philadelphia, who's great, and I think he does the sound for the Eagles, and he's produced like a couple stand-up albums over there. And also Control 2 helped, where I just like spent all the money myself, you know, and it was the kind of thing where my goal was just to break even. So it wasn't about making money at all. Actually, very few of the things that I do are about making money. And yeah, that I did because I had total control over it, and it was my first one. And yeah, so it was both my decision, and the decision was made for me as well, just to do it on my own. And I love doing it. I have like experience producing things, so I knew how to produce, which was good. And that came out well. And the Todd and I thing, his manager shopped it a few places, but it was just ready to go. And I mean, this album, we also kind of got a little impatient, where we've been doing this essentially for 12 or 13 years, you know, and we've been working on it for a year and a half of like, we'd get busy and we didn't want to sit down and, you know, go through it. So I think the point came where, we're splitting it, you know, like whatever the numbers are, splitting it between each other, you know, the profits, where it's like, well, why split it another way, you know, like already, especially if I know how to do everything. So yeah, we just released it ourselves. And for me, selfishly, like the album, I helped make that album great, but the album's going to sell because it's Todd, you know? So Todd has such a large following that whatever PR a label could put behind it, there's, Todd being retweeted by like Sarah Silverman or, Jimmy Kimmel or something. No one is going to match that or be worth, the 50% that they would take for doing that. So it just made sense to do ourselves. And we released it through this thing called like TuneCore, I guess is what it's called, where it's this service. If you want to put out like an album, it's fucking easy. It has to sound good and shit, but you just pay $50 and they distribute it to iTunes, Amazon, YouTube, Pandora, and it collects royalties for you, which is great. So we just did that. And then this album, I didn't feel like paying for it myself, and I wanted to see what the experience would be like to release it with a label. So
you're talking about the Stuffed Boy?
Yeah, it's going to be called Stuffed Boy. Yeah, please.
I am curious about, like, technically speaking, why you decided to put it on Spotify. Was that immediately, right away, you put it on Spotify as well as everything else? Or
yeah.
And then, because obviously, I was going to buy it, but then I was like, oh, it's on Spotify.
Yeah, no.
And then I didn't support you.
No, it's okay. No, I probably got 0.015 cents from that, so don't worry about it. So it's also, I think when people offer to pay an exposure, it's often incredibly insulting. But for me, for that first album, I just needed more people to know like what I am, where I don't do sketches. Like I don't have a vlog or, some weekly YouTube show. So that for me is people stumbling across me if they're listening to, Pandora or Spotify and they see my stuff. Like, that was a thing where as long as so my goal was for me to have something out that people could hear, where I don't now I've put like clips from that album online, because I didn't want to burn the material, but also it's like how much money can I make in the long run versus how much is it costing me? So that probably costs, in Spotify, like terms, where that's going to cost me, like hundreds and hundreds of dollars probably, but so many more people are going to hear about me, where probably now or a few years from now, I wouldn't put it on Spotify, where it's like, oh, people know who I am and I'm putting this out for people who like my stuff and to make money, So that was, my goal was not to keep that iTunes, where someone would buy it on iTunes, I'd make more money off of it. And it's interesting. Like people, have found me through that album, which is a mystery to me, where I can see where people listen to it on the service that I use. And I like people, it's, oh shit, a surprising amount of people listen to me in New Zealand on Spotify. And I don't know if I'll, tour New Zealand, but it's cool at some point where, if not symbolically, that, oh yeah, so many more people are hearing it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, I think it's a balance between exposure and money. And like I'm in that same boat too, where right now I'd rather have more exposure. I'd rather have more people listening to the podcast than, try to make money or try to like say, all right, maybe if I optimize this a little bit, I'll make like an extra couple $100 a month. It's like, screw it. Let's just put it out. And that's the decision you make anytime you're going to distribute something, whether you put it on Netflix, if you're lucky enough to get there, or Hulu or wherever. You're like, all right, there's a balance. If I put this on Amazon Prime, it's probably not going to get as many views as if I put it on Netflix.
Right.
The money might be different, right? Like these other platforms that aren't as big might be willing to pay more money. So I think that's a decision you have to always make. And like you said, once you have an audience built up, then you can kind of put it anywhere because your audience is going to find you.
Yeah.
Then you're sacrificing, oh, I can make more money, but I'm probably not going to get a lot of new audience coming in from it.
And it differs for everyone. Like for where I'm at, like what's right for you could change in weeks or months. After a certain point, it's like, I'm not going to put this out for free anymore, and you don't have to. But it depends. Exactly what you said. It's just, do I want to make money? Like, what do I want out of this? And I think that's the most important thing for people to think about when they're creating things, where just, what do I want out of this? And it sounds like such an easy question, but it totally influences like how well or how happy you are with the way it does. Right,
because I think that's you're setting your expectations for it as well. And then Stuffed Boy,
that I did through a label because I want to see how that affects my career, where will more people listen to it. So also, I didn't have to pay for anything up front, which is really great. Like, they paid for my audio engineer, they paid for the girl designing it. And these are people who have done free stuff for me in the past, like we were talking about earlier. But now I could get them money, which meant something to me. Because, again, they were probably like, I don't even fucking remember doing that for you. But I'm like, this person did something for me 4 years ago. They deserve money for that. And now I can afford to get them money. Does that make sense? So that mattered to me. And then also the quality of the audio engineering, the quality of the design of it are going to go up, because if I was paying it for it myself, I'd be like, do I want to pay $500 to this person, or could I get it done for $250? Where I don't even have to think about that. So it's through Rooftop Comedy, which is owned by Audible, and they have a lot of money to do PR and stuff, which I don't have the same PR. So, for instance, I can ask Todd to retweet, like a link to the album, but I don't have access to that next level where, like, with the Todd album, people with millions of followers would tweet it out. But for me, I get bumped down to like 100,000 or something, which is still incredible, but they can help me reach a larger audience than I would be by myself. So that mattered a lot to me.
I think I had another question, but I can't remember it.
That's okay, because I just swallowed directly into the microphone.
I gotta stop. I'm trying to get to a point where I just am so good where I don't have to edit things out.
Yeah,
I edit out
sure.
some stuff.
Right.
Like this, I'm gonna edit out.
Right.
Probably. But now that we said it, I'm probably not.
I think you
gotta
keep it in now.
You said that in your album. I think you're like totally cutting this out.
Yeah.
And then you left it in.
Well, that was the thing I did with this album. Is that album was mostly just straight material, where this next one that's coming out, Stuffed Boy, is a lot of riffing. Like, I actually do material, like, not even jokes that I haven't done. Like, I'll comment on things in the moment of something I fuck up, or some sort of, I reference Todd in the beginning, where you don't hear any of Todd's stand-up. All you hear is someone introducing me, and then I riff about Todd for a few minutes, where that was a thing for this album that meant a lot to me too. One of the things, my like writing with stand-up has like gotten pretty good, but I think what separates me is my ability to riff and like be in the moment and just be really loose on stage. So if I just do straight material, like, I'm not going to be as good as I am, if that makes sense. So I'm so proud of all the material on it, but I think I would have done myself a disservice in terms of my skill set to not like riff and stuff, and I think that'll make it better. And I didn't do that on the first one.
It was just one night, one recording.
Yeah,
one
I did
show,
one. Yeah,
right. And like a lot of times, especially if it's a filmed set,
right,
comedians will do 3 to 5.
Yeah,
a lot of pressure to just have one show.
Yeah,
well, I mean, obviously not easy to just fill up multiple shows,
right?
But there is added pressure there, right?
Yeah, for sure. With that, so even the audio record, I'm one of the only people that I know who only does one. So
oh, really?
I only did one in Philly, and I only did one for this one. And it is a thing where I prepare so much that in my mind, ideally I could do more than one. So if I did it in Philly, I would probably do multiple shows now. But I did in LA, and I was telling you before, I was worried that no one was going to come in LA. It ended up selling out, thank God. But if I did 2, like, oh, what, I'm going to have 100 at one and then 20. I think, like, what's the fucking point? So for me personally, my head is, if I'm not gonna nail this by now, I'm just not gonna, you know what I mean? Like, that's why I wasn't nervous about it either, because it's like, all right, this is either as good as I think it's gonna be, or I'm delusional, and no matter what, it's gonna suck. So let's just fucking do it,
right?
And
then Rooftop has to deal with it.
Yeah, right. Let them add in canned laughter, right, and applause. That's their problem.
All right, cool. Let's do some questions here. I took some questions from Instagram.
Hell yeah.
If you guys want to ask questions, you could follow me on Instagram.
Follow him on Instagram. I have to follow you.
I don't even know. I think I added you today and I didn't follow you. Let me see.
I love it.
Following you now.
My favorite
Blake Wexler.
My favorite bit in the world is to be following someone on Twitter, and then like as they're having a conversation, walk up to them and then just hit unfollow and then walk away.
That's really good.
It's my favorite. It's just weird.
Yeah, you could just do that randomly and screw with them, or you could also do it when like they said something you didn't like. And
right.
Like, all right, you know what?
Oh, funny.
That's it.
How's that feel?
I love people that are like, can you believe this person unfollowed? Like there's been a couple people who like get really upset.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know. I don't even look at that. Especially on Instagram, it's kind of hard. You'd have to go through and find out if somebody unfollowed you.
Yeah, that you can't even know. But yeah, it is. That's a maturity thing where now I'm like, you can't let that affect you, because it does. Like it used to get in my head where I'm like, God, what the fuck?
Yeah, if it's like a comedian or somebody you respect, they follow you and it feels really great, and all of a sudden you like look back later and you're like, they unfollowed me. What did I do? What did I say?
I have to reevaluate my last however many years. When did they unfollow me? Was it years ago? Was it recently? When did I fuck up?
Yeah, I've had people call me out for it. Like,
oh,
did Matt D'Avella just unfollow me? Yes, I did.
Yeah, I did, because you act like that.
Yeah, exactly. Because you'd get upset about it. There's a couple people like you might do this for exes or whatever, but where I just like block them and mute them.
Yeah,
so I don't see them. But then I'm still like, well, what's the point?
Right.
Just unfollow. But I'm non-confrontational. I don't like getting in confrontations, so I'm like, I will just to save that awkward.
Right.
Like I literally saw one of my exes in like my hometown. I was walking with my girlfriend, and then I saw my ex with a guy walking down the other side of the street, and I was like, oh, we're gonna turn around and walk the other way.
Yeah,
there's
why
not a
deal
chance.
with it?
And it was a loop, and then we ended up running into him again.
You just walked around a traffic circle for 3 days.
I was like, we gotta go. I gotta go into this cigar shop. I need to get out of this.
You need to start smoking.
Yeah. And then I've been smoking for 8 years now.
Oh wow.
Yeah, picked
excellent.
up a habit.
Right.
All right. I got a question here from Henry. Where is he from? He doesn't say. He's a filmmaker. He said, would love to know how comedians figure out where the line is. People always talk about how good comedy is getting close enough to the line but not crossing it. But I've always found that similar to documentary interviewing, we both get the most effective and genuine responses from my subjects' audiences by finding that line, getting real close to it, but not crossing it.
For me personally, I have a different opinion on this, where I do think you can talk about literally anything. I don't. But I think a comedian can make literally anything funny if you're responsible and people know what your point of view is. So I think being the more edgy a topic is, the more difficult it is to make it funny. So say like you have a joke about like a national tragedy or something like that, you have to put so much work into. You need to make sure you're not making this is my opinion. This is how I would approach that. And also I just wouldn't tell the joke because this is too much work. So you would have to make sure you're not hurting the victims. You need to make sure I would make sure I wouldn't be hurting the victims. I would make sure that someone who just saw it in a vacuum wouldn't be like, oh, what the fuck is Blake Wexler promoting, like bombings and stuff. And then I would also make sure that it's like more clever than it is edgy or like shitty. Does that make sense? So
right, it's because especially early on, it's a tendency to be like, oh, here's my abortion joke, here's my 9/11 joke, and then you just kind of like do it because it's shocking, or it is crossing the line in a way. Yeah, but it's not. If you're writing a joke about a tragedy like that, it needs to be so funny you can't not tell it.
Yeah, it needs to be brilliant. And for me, I don't talk about that stuff because I'm like, it's hard enough to come up with material that is funny, and like, even I'm not like an edgy comic, but like I'll like swear and maybe say something like I shouldn't say every once in a while, but it's always silly or whatever, where it's hard enough to come up with that material that I wouldn't have to defend, where why would I put all this effort into a joke where even if done perfectly, it could still hurt someone. So for me, I just don't shoot at that basket. I think that I just think it's too much work, to be totally honest. I think it's too much work, and I think the lack of benefit does not, I think like the harm that could do totally outweighs any benefit. Because to me, it's like, oh, best case scenario, you just told a great joke. Like I have a lot of great jokes, hopefully, so why tell that one? That's just my point of view. But I think with comedians in general, you have the right to say anything that you want. And I think that people have the right to not like it.
Mm-hmm. Are there certain comedians that can get away with stuff more than others can, where it's like they can approach certain topics that it would be more difficult for others to approach?
Yes, and I think there's two ends of the spectrum. I think one is shitty, edgy comedians who you expect shitty garbage from, and their audience likes shitty garbage, and they'll love it, and they can get away with it because they're not losing intelligent fans, you know?
Right.
So I think a lazy comedian can get away with it, and I think the opposite end of the spectrum, a brilliant, you know, progressive, intelligent comedian can get away with it as well, because you know how smart they are, you know where they're coming from, and they have the skill set to make it funny. Right. So I don't know, this is a weird example, but like, I don't know if John Mulaney has, John Mulaney did a really funny bit at the IFC Awards, I think, that he hosted with Nick Kroll, where they did a Harvey Weinstein joke. And that's a tough subject because he made so many great films. I'm totally kidding.
There you go.
Yeah.
You found it.
It's a tough subject because he is an awful monster, you know, who has ruined people's lives. But they took him down where I'm going to butcher the joke, but they made fun of him in a way where like, oh yeah, you know, like Harvey Weinstein's tombstone is just going to say XXL unmarked grave or something. And so they're punching up, they're making fun of the bad person.
Yeah.
And you know where they're coming from, where I believe in the same monologue or act that they were doing, like they were pumping up, you know, like women's rights and the Me Too movement. So they accomplished two things. They said something very funny and clever. You knew where they were coming from because, like, you know their politics, and they know that, you know, they're like pro women and anti harassment, and they punched and took out the monster and weren't making fun of the victims. So yeah, I think that's probably the best example I can come up with.
Yeah, I think Ricky Gervais's most recent album, or his special on Netflix. Have you seen that?
I haven't watched it.
Yeah,
no.
there's a lot in there. Well, he toes the line. He definitely crosses the line, but I think that's what makes him funny. But I think also, like you said, when you know the person and you know they're joking, you know their sense of humor, you can get away with a lot more. And it's, I think, yeah, it's hard to say. Like, I feel like there is no line. The only line, like you said, is if it's funny, you can say whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
And people can react however they want to react. If you're just getting started out, maybe err on the side of caution,
because they may not know, like that goes from to the point of them knowing where you're coming from, because if you just started, they're not that familiar with you yet, so you can accomplish it over like your career where, oh, I've seen his work or her work, I know where she's coming from or he's coming from. Or in a set, if you've established credibility, where 20 minutes into a 40-minute set, they'll be like, oh, I trust this person. Now you can make that joke, where if you made that joke early on in the set, it probably wouldn't do well.
Yeah, and the crowd might turn on you.
Right.
All right, cool. We got Andy here. He said, was literally just thinking about this in the shower.
Oh, so hell yeah,
good.
man.
Now I just want to set the context.
Right, what do you have
so
for me,
in the
man?
shower, and he was thinking about you. Where's the line between a similar joke another comedian has used that you can use, and one that could be seen as stolen, even if by honest accident?
Yeah, so that's another thing, where how much do you love this joke? So with that, if I have a joke that's similar to another comic, I'll be like 9 times out of or like 9.9 times out of 10, I'm like, I'll just stop doing it, because it's just, I'll just write another joke. You know, like if it's close, I just don't want to deal with the people coming up to me and being like, oh, your joke's similar to what's his face's, and I'd be like, oh, actually, here's why it's different. And even starting to say why it's different, I'm like, this is exhausting me, I don't want to fucking deal with it, I'll write another joke. But I think in general, it's pretty point of view based. So if I had a joke about school buses, and I'm trying to think of and like Dave Chappelle had a joke about school buses, let's just say we had the same level of talent, our jokes would just be different, because I have my point of view of how I grew up and like my life, and he has his point of view. So I think point of view totally changes everything, because if you look at if you look at Jim Gaffigan's set, it's all shit that like all comics talk about, but the way in which he talks about it is so original that it's, you know, like kids, food, you know, it's just, that if you looked at his set list, you'd be like, this is the worst fucking comedian I've ever seen. But then you hear him talk, it's like, oh, he speaks in such a way from his own unique point of view that it, like, you know, is different.
Like, it's changed a lot in terms of how to make it today as a comedian to even when you first started, like 12, 13 years ago or so. Like, what has changed in your mind, and what stayed the same, like to be able to actually make it as a working comedian?
I think that, and by like I'm like I guess relatively young compared to most comics, but I do. Since I've started doing, I've listened to billions of hours worth of podcasts, read so many books. So I do, in addition to doing stand up, I've like I almost said become a student of comedy, which is disgusting.
Yeah, it just doesn't sound right.
No, it's really bad.
I get the sentiment.
Yeah, that we have to edit. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
So, but I've just consumed so much comedy where hearing people more successful and experienced than me talk about it, it seems like the difference, and from my own point of view, that when you used to get a late, I'm sorry, I get very emotional talking about Letterman and Leno.
You can't see, but he's crying right now.
I am very upset. When like a late night show, when you got like Letterman or Leno, or before that Carson, you have a career. So if you got that 5 minutes, you were famous and you just had a career. You can tour for now on. You can get TV shows. Where now it's an interesting thing where other things can launch you into that. Either so no one really cares about late night sets anymore. Kind of where I had a buddy do Conan in the past few years. And he went up to his like reps afterwards, and it went great. And he's so funny. And he goes up to his reps afterwards, and he goes, "All right, guys, like let's like okay, where are we meeting next? You know?" And they're like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" They're like, "Oh no, we're gonna set up meetings, you know, now because I just did Conan." They're like, "No one cares." And my buddy Yasser Lester, who's hysterical, had a really really funny comment where he had his own show on MTV. And just he like no like even bookers in LA for just unpaid free spots. He goes, yeah, you know, like I had this show on MTV, and they're like, okay, like we'll book you in 6 months. You know, like it just doesn't matter. But so traditional means I think are way less effective in terms of launching you to the next phase of your career. But on the flip side, because of the internet and because of like, you know, YouTube and be able to create your own stuff, that has evened it out, if not helped even more, where you know, the fact that you can do your own podcast and get your own listener base, and then also just put something on YouTube and it can go viral or whatever, and it can launch you if you have the skills to that next place. So I think it is also this is a weird tangent that I feel very strongly about, but I think YouTube stars are incredibly talented people at that thing. So there was a recent, over the past couple of years, a fad of networks giving YouTube stars shows and pilots because like A plus B equals C, where they're like, oh, here is a person who does this. B equals they have 10 million views. C, that will translate to their show, that skill and those audience members. But the issue is that YouTube audiences, people who watch stuff online, don't necessarily watch shit on TV. So it's a totally different medium. And the skill set why they're so good on YouTube doesn't translate to a classic, you know, half-hour show or 45-minute show. So these things kept bombing, where there were like a couple of very, very successful people because they were great at a bunch of different things. But it's, you know, I think Mitch Hedberg had a joke about this or something where it's like, if like, oh, like you're a comedian, like why don't like can you farm also or whatever? That's not what it is, but it's just a totally different skill set.
Yeah, how it's like when he got into stand-up, he thought that's all he had to do. But I have to write, I got to produce, I got to direct, I got to do all this shit. He's like, yeah.
Exactly what it was. So I do think it's cool where, like you can find that audience. And if you're doing it, if you're putting the right stuff out there, you know, like that will bring in the right audience for you. Because I don't think you can just throw anything out there. Because if you're doing something that you can't sustain, then I think that that doesn't like help anyone.
Yeah, you brought up a good point just about like the paying respect to people who are doing things on certain platforms like YouTube or otherwise social media. If they do it well, like, is that something that's generally looked down upon with most comedians, where it's like, oh, you're a Vine comedian or you're an Instagram comedian? I think like obviously there's certainly people who it's just no taste at all. Like, it's like,
Right.
why is this shit funny? Like, cut. You know what I mean? Like those quick choppy videos.
Yeah.
And they make a funny face, and then the video ends, and you're like, that's
Right.
comedy right there.
Yeah, well, comedians look down on everything, like particularly each other. Like it's just constant shit talking. So if we hate each other, we hate stand-ups hate improv people, stand-ups hate sketch people, stand-ups hate fucking Vine and all this shit.
Yeah.
And I like, for me, it's there's great everything. You know, stand-up's my favorite thing. So in my opinion, I think you can be incredibly talented and great on Vine or anything. But my opinion is that like a bad Vine is like, or an untalented Vine person is exponentially less talented than an untalented comedian. So I think the ceilings are equal, but the floors on certain mediums are lower. Does that make sense?
That's great. That's a great way to look at it.
Thank
you. It's like, because like it actually says something if you go out and perform stand up versus somebody who's just making Vine videos that are horrible in their apartment. You haven't really taken an effort.
Right. But I would love to be proven wrong. Like maybe someone I guess if you do stand up, you were able to walk and make your way to a stage. You know,
your
like
shoes on.
Yeah, that's where the bar is.
Yeah. All right, let's do quick questions and then close up the podcast.
Cool.
If you could go back to college graduation, what would you change? Like, what would you do differently from that point?
Be less hungover.
Probably. I think you could even take it back to drink less, maybe.
Yeah. No. I would have
more.
the same night, but less bad in the. I would,
More
probably
water.
not wear like a shirt underneath the robe. I was sweating a lot. College graduate. I don't really regret. Probably like stop eating and drinking the way I think like I wouldn't change really anything. I really lucked out with Emerson, where it was so supportive to like people in entertainment and like, you know, artists, where I lived in a dorm and I could go to the basement of my dorm, literally take an elevator for 15 seconds and perform in a beautiful black box theater, sold out 200 people in like my pajamas. Like we literally did that, and so many college students could do that. And then, you know, so many Emerson kids could just make their own films because they had all the equipment, and Boston was right there. So I think I was really lucky with that. And I would maybe do even more stand-up in Boston. I did a lot of stand-up around the city, but I think I would have gotten even more into that scene than I did. But yeah, that would be the thing I'd change.
What universal skill that you've learned do you think has helped you the most?
I think listening, which is weird, or judging a room. So that's the thing from doing this so long, is you can tell if something's off and how to fix that. Where even if I'm hanging out with a group of people, like telling a story, just like a bunch of friends hanging out, and I'm telling a story about like some weird thing I saw, I have a sixth sense, and I think a lot of people do, where I can tell when people start to drift a little bit, you know, and that's helped in social situations where it's not a career thing. I'm just less boring, hopefully. And in like, if I'm pitching a show, which is different from stand up, in the room, I can tell like, oh, they need a change. Like I need to change my energy or keep them engaged somehow. So I can tell when people aren't really being engaged, which is a hyper awareness that is often not worth knowing, where it's just, if I'm on the phone with a tech support person, if I'm explaining a problem, I hear them stop listening to me as I'm talking about why my iPhone doesn't work, and I can tell on the phone, and then I'll start getting frustrated. So it's just the thing, like in a perfect world, I would just not know that the person in Bangalore doesn't like is bored by me, but I'm like anyway, so how are you, you know, and then my thing doesn't get fixed. So yeah, it's just a stupid, I would say that it helps for the most part.
Yeah, almost like a social awareness. I think that like just, and like social competence too. It's like when you're emailing somebody, not trying to get something every single time you like reach out to somebody.
Right.
I think there's just some basics there.
Yeah, social graces too, or yeah.
How do you get through doubt? Like you've had these experiences where you've bombed and you don't do well. Like what keeps you going? Like how do you get through those periods of doubt?
I think just having the next thing. Always, where I'll always have the next show booked. I'll always have like another idea that I'm working on, where I just pitched a show that like didn't go anywhere, and I put so much work into it and it did not go anywhere, but I'm like, okay, I already have the idea for the next one, so like let's just flush that and if I'm famous someday, I'll be able to sell it or something. You know, like I still have that show, but there is a negative to that where when I do have successful things, I don't sit in them and appreciate it, where I'm programmed to move to the next thing because there is just so much inherent failure in this business where I'm programmed to be like, all right, that was the thing. Now it's like, we hurry up. Let's do the next thing before you feel the pain of this failing. Yeah. But even with like my, you know, like that album that I record, Stuffed Boy, like it was great. It was an amazing night. And I literally have not thought about it. And it's a thing I need to do because I'm so programmed to, but like I've had like a lot of lucky things go my way. Like I've had like, you know, enough success that I'm doing well. But, you know, just by doing this, I've had so many failures that even when something goes well, like I haven't sat down to think about how great that night was. And it happened like a month ago, you know? So it's a thing I need to work on for sure.
Well, that's what we interviewed Rick Hansen for Minimalism. And that's one thing he said. He's like a neuropsychologist. But basically, if you want to be happier, it's easier for us biologically to have these negative memories stick with us longer. It's like Velcro for the brain. Like if something bad happens to you, you're like, I don't want that to happen again. I'm never going to forget it. And then the good stuff, it tends to just bounce off like Teflon. It's
Interesting.
Like it doesn't connect. But in order to be happy, all you have to do, and it's easier said than done, but it's a practice of taking those good experiences and just letting them like sit in them a little bit longer and be like, wow, that was really cool. Like I'm really appreciative. And whether it's like, you know, journaling frequently where you can like write down like what you appreciate and expressing gratitude, but those are the things that are going to make you happy in the long run. Easier said than done, but you know what I mean?
But
it's
that's
definitely
great.
a practice.
Yeah, that's really,
it's like the thing, so a lot of advice is just not, it's not so straightforward, or it's not very easy. It's like, oh, just do this.
You have
it's
a starting point and an end point, but you need to get between those points, and where the fuck do you go?
Yeah. Is there any like advice that you've gotten over the years that's really stuck with you to this day?
My friend Daniel Kino, who's a stand-up, and he gave me advice early on of just when you go into a meeting, be it like a coffee or a show or a podcast, like whatever you're doing, know what you want out of it. And that has just been such great advice. So if I'm doing stand-up, it's like, what do I want out of this set? Do I want to record it for a late night set? Do I want to record it for my college agent? Do I want to work on this new shit that I've never done before and riff and be super silly and record it and listen back to it? Do I just need to get back on stage and get like my legs under me again because I haven't done stand-up in a while? So let's just do your material and like that's all we need out of it. So with stand-up, it's that. With a meeting, it's like, oh, I want them to know that I'm funny or whatever. Or is it, oh, I need this person to try to buy something from me, or, you know what I mean? Or recommend me for something. So it depends. I think just asking yourself what you want out of something before you do it is like the right thing. For instance, today I wanted, nice coffee and 2 waters, and I've gotten that.
I got both of it. Yeah, it's all setting the bar. Expectations.
So we're there.
Yeah, I think what that actually comes to is it's also the action that comes after that, which is you're more prepared. A lot of people I don't think prepare enough.
That's
like
great.
If you go into a job interview, like you need to stand out from everybody else that has taken that job interview before you, and the only way you're going to do that is if you prepare for it.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
All right. 2 more questions here, and we'll wrap up. What's one thing people should start reading or read before they go to bed tonight?
I just need to shut my head off every once in a while, and sports help me do that. And I've been reading, it's a really popular book. It's by this great author, Shea Serrano, and he writes about sports in a very funny, accessible way where it's like, oh, this is a hilarious person who happens to be talking about sports. So he, I don't know if it's called it's not called Book of Basketball. It's a book about basketball, but like he asks things like, oh, what is, is Kobe a nerd? And he just does this deep dive into everything that he's ever done. Like, is that something a nerd would do? But this is a thing that a nerd wouldn't do. So it's really, really smart and funny.
I just realized recently that I should probably stop doing that question before this and final question. It's because now I'll ask you, what's the best way for people to find you online?
Oh,
then we already just told them to go somewhere.
It's cool. Yeah, they should go there.
It's not good. All right, let's wrap it up. How should people find you online?
They can find me at Blake Wexler on Twitter, Instagram. I don't really use Snapchat anymore, but like that. Also, blakewexler.com. And yeah, my albums are out there. 12 Years of Voicemails from Todd Glass to Blake Wexler. The Blake album is my stand-up that's up there. And yeah, I think that's those are the places.
Cool, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Dude, thanks for having me.
That's the podcast this week. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to check out Blake's stuff. He's super funny. He's got an album coming out very soon. All right. See you guys next week.